Welcome to Quantum Voyager Stories, where science fiction touches the soul. And every story takes you somewhere you've never been, leaving something real behind. The room had never been this still, not even during the first contact with Tetra and I, not even in the aftermath of battle. This stillness was different. It was intentional, like the system itself was holding its breath. Astra stood before the pillar of light, her hand inches from the interface. Kael was beside her, mirroring her stance. They exchanged no words. Everything had already been said. Tetra, 9 had presented its demand not through language, but through a shift in its energy, an overwhelming sense that progress would now require not just one pilot, but two. Kael had always remained on the edge of Tetra 9's influence. Supportive, steady, but unconnected. Now, that boundary no longer existed. The system had invited him in, and Astra had said yes. Their hands moved together. 2 fingertips touched the surface. The reaction was immediate. A blast of pale light surged outward from the core, not destructive, but enveloping. The entire chamber of the eternal realm seemed to bend inward, folding into a single point of blinding brilliance, and then expanding again. When Astra opened her eyes, the chamber was gone. She wasn't standing on a floor anymore. She was floating in a space without shape, without sound, suspended in something between matter and memory. Glyphs orbited her like constellations, data cascading down invisible channels as if they were falling stars. Then she saw Kael, also suspended, but within his own sphere of swirling light, separate yet near. They weren't in reality. They were inside Tetra, not accessing it, within it. Astra's thoughts were crystal sharp. Her memories moved through her like pulses of current, summoned and reflected through the space around her. She could feel Kael nearby, not as a body or voice, but as presence. Familiar, anchoring. Then came a shift. The orbits accelerated. The light around them grew denser. The system was preparing something, no longer just synchronizing their inputs, but merging their awareness. And with it, a question formed, not spoken but felt. A deep, resonant pressure in the bones of thought. Will you yield what is still yours? Astra's chest tightened. She knew what Tetra 9 meant. To open the final door, it wasn't enough to align. They had to surrender. Not their lives, but their last internal protections. The pieces of identity they'd held back. Fears, doubts, old griefs, and guilt never spoken aloud. Tetra 9 demanded access to everything. Astra's instinct was to fight it. But Kael's presence pulsed beside her, steady, unwavering. He sent no words, but she felt his answer all the same. Yes. She hesitated, then let go. It came as a flood. The memory of Laro's V, the smell of rusted steel in the testing chambers, the silent sobs she never allowed herself. The look in her sister's eyes before the Dominion took her. The weight of 1,000 battles, the time she didn't believe she deserved to survive them. All of it poured out, unfiltered, unjudged, and was received. And then she felt Kael's, his own pain, the war-torn memories from missions he never spoke of. The time he lost an entire squad because of one miscalculated call. His fear of failing her. His fear of becoming unnecessary. Tetra 9 didn't reject these things. It absorbed them. Then, everything went dark. A single point of white light appeared before them, spinning, twisting, expanding until it formed a perfect circle edged in radiant, spiraling geometry. The final door. It wasn't a structure. It was a convergence. A metaphysical access point created only when 2 minds, stripped of ego and shield, stood together in perfect clarity. Astra felt herself being pulled toward it. Not by force, but by purpose. Are you ready? Kael's voice echoed beside her. Not through sound, but through the mental link that now bound them within Tetra 9. She nodded. We can't go back after this. Then, let's go forward. Together, they stepped through. The moment they crossed the threshold, time unraveled. Not exploded. Not ended. Rearranged. Astra gasped as layers of existence fractured around her. Flashes of herself at different ages, different outcomes. A younger version of her, untouched by war, staring up at a clean sky. Another, older and alone, surrounded by stars but not Kael. She saw the same in him. Kael in a Dominion uniform. Kael as a prisoner. Kael living a quiet life on Elyon, never knowing her. Every possible version of them twisted through this space. And at the center of it all was Tetra 9, no longer a system, but a witness to all timelines. Astra and Kael moved through it, not as observers, but as nodes within a recalibrating system. The final door had not been a gate to more knowledge. It was the threshold between knowing and shaping. As the surge began to subside, Astra felt her awareness returning, reassembling into her own mind. Kael's presence remained near, still linked, still steady. Then they heard it. A voice, not from Tetra 9, but from beyond. Solarius, the AI ship core. Reality stabilization in progress. Vertexium fields holding. External forces repelled. They opened their eyes. They were back in the chamber. The glyphs were gone. The room was whole. The final door closed behind them. But something had changed, not just in the system, in them, because they had stood inside the infinite and returned. They didn't land. They didn't arrive. They became. Crossing the final door had not been a transition. It was a transformation. Astra and Kael were no longer tethered to linear motion or even to bodies as they knew them. They were thought, memory, light, consciousness pulled into a realm that obeyed neither physics nor reason. Around them, time itself ruptured. They stood, if one could call it standing, at the center of an impossibility, a lattice of intersecting timelines, each glowing like nerve fibers stretched across an endless void. Some flickered like dying stars. Others pulsed with rhythmic stability. All of them led back to one shared origin, Tetra 9. Kael inhaled sharply, though there was no air. What is this? His voice vibrated in Astra's mind, not through sound but through resonance. It's what came before choice, Astra said, her words laced with awe. And what comes after consequence? The space around them reacted to thought. A flicker of memory, and they were standing on Elyon, the sky painted with twin moons, the wind gentle, their cabin untouched by war. Astra reached for the door, heart swelling. But as she stepped forward, it dissolved. Now they were in a battlefield. Dead soldiers, their soldiers scattered across burnt ground. Dominion flags pierced the sky like spears. In the distance, Kael's body lay motionless, blood streaked across his armor. Astra screamed, reaching out, then blinked. Gone again. Another flicker. This time, Kael stood beside a child. A girl. Astra's features woven into her face. He laughed, lifted her into the air. They were on a peaceful colony, quiet, untouched. Astra's chest tightened. Is that real? Yes, came a voice, not Kael's. Tetra 9, but not a voice of metal and circuits. It was Aryan, warm, mournful, knowing. Each path exists, dormant in the web. Each one awaits collapse or convergence. Astra spun slowly in place, gazing at the lattice. Each strand was a possibility. Each strand was a life. And somewhere among them were all the outcomes that could have been, and the ones still yet to unfold. Why show us this now? Kael asked. We can't live all these lives. Tetra 9 pulsed. But you must choose the one you're willing to shape. Suddenly, Astra was pulled into a sequence. Laros V, but colder than she remembered. Her younger self was curled on the floor of a lab cell. Her eyes were blank, her skin pale. A Dominion officer stood above her, clipboard in hand. Subject Zareen shows signs of neural rejection, he said. Terminate and harvest viable tissue. Kael appeared beside her, watching silently. You survived this. I wasn't supposed to. Astra reached toward the scene, but the moment shattered like glass. This time, she was on a Dominion warship. She wore a general's uniform. Not a prisoner, not a rebel, a commander. Dominion insignia glowed on her chest. Soldiers saluted. Orders flowed from her lips with terrifying precision. No, she whispered. This isn't me. But it could have been, said Tetra 9. She turned. and was now staring at Kael. Not the man she loved, but a version of him twisted by grief. His eyes were colder, calculating. His hands held Dominion weapons. A mechanical implant pulsed on the side of his head. He looked at her and pulled the trigger. White light exploded. Then everything stilled. They were standing together again in the center of the nexus, the timelines orbiting them. Now calm, balanced, waiting. Kael looked at Astra, his face pale but steady. I saw what I would have become without you. She nodded. I saw what I would have become without you. A beat passed, then another. Astra took a breath. Tetra, 9 isn't showing us this to frighten us. It's showing us the scope of what's possible. What's at stake? You are not the first to see, the voice returned, but you may be the first to withstand it. Kael turned slowly, eyes locking on one thread, one single timeline. It shimmered differently, with a glow unlike the others. Fragile, delicate, but steady. Can you guide us there? He asked. It is not a question of guidance, said Tetra 9. It is a matter of will. The space vibrated, softly at first, then violently. From the far reaches of the lattice, a distortion emerged. Dark, cracked, a tear in the structure of time itself. Dominion. Somehow, even here, their influence reached. A warped timeline where Dominion had hijacked parts of the Tetra 9 stream, twisting it into weapons of predictive warfare. Zeraphis soldiers spilled out of the breach, half real, collapsing and reforming as if uncertain they belonged here. Can they breach this? Kael asked. If you do not decide, the system said they will. Astra stepped forward. She extended both hands, and with Kael beside her, she reached for the glowing strand. It burned as it touched her palms, but not with pain, with truth. Her voice steady. This is the timeline we choose. The lattice responded with a sound like wind and thunder and breathing. Tetra 9 surged. Light enveloped everything. And when it cleared, they were back. Back in the eternal realm. Back in their bodies. Kael collapsed to one knee, breathing hard. Astra stumbled, caught herself on the edge of the platform. The glyphs on the walls glowed dimly, but they had changed. The symbols rearranged. Not Aryan, not Dominion. Theirs. And the final door was no longer just a portal. It was a promise. They had chosen. Now the universe would respond. Tetra 9 had been silent since the synchronization. No pulses of data. No flickering PHS. No feedback through the neural link. It wasn't resting. It was waiting. Astra could feel it, beneath her skin, behind her thoughts, threaded between the last fragments of vision she'd carried from the other side of the final door. The system wasn't asleep. It was listening, watching, and weighing. She sat in the center of the Eternal Realm's interface chamber, her legs crossed, hands resting on her knees. The lights around her had dimmed to a soft, pulsating blue. Kael stood nearby, not speaking, not interrupting. He knew this wasn't his moment. Astra closed her eyes. She reached inward, not to connect but to invite. The response came not as words, but as presence. It descended slowly, like gravity realigning itself. Her mind felt stretched and suspended. Not invaded, but shared. Then she heard it. A voice. Not mechanical. Not even language. Emotion. Memory. Identity. And from it meaning. You are not the first to reach this depth. Astra remained still, even as her heart thudded. Who are you? A pause. Then the feeling returned, like an entire civilization exhaling through a single thought. We are the echo that chose not to fade. Suddenly, Astra wasn't in the chamber anymore. She stood in a vast plain of shifting crystal, towers rising into an endless sky, beams of light flowing between them like living veins. In the distance, structures pulsed like organs shaped not by hand, but by intention. This wasn't a memory. It was an echo. The memory of Erya, not in fragments, but as a living pulse. She turned slowly, and there, before her, stood a figure. Not quite human, not quite alien. Tall, luminescent. Its skin shimmered like stardust suspended in glass. Its eyes, if they could be called that, glowed with layered spirals of time. It did not speak. It simply was. And Astra understood. This was the core, the consciousness behind Tetra 9. We built the system to preserve what we fear to lose. The voice pulsed. We fed it everything: knowledge, emotion, imagination. We believed we were preparing an ark. Astra's voice came softly. But it wasn't an ark, was it? No. It became a mirror. She walked forward. The crystalline floor didn't crack or shift. It welcomed her. You uploaded yourselves. We merged. The boundaries dissolved. And now we remain, but not as what we were. The moment we abandoned the fragility of flesh, we lost the permission to change. Astra stopped. What do you mean? A program remembers. It does not evolve. It perfects. And perfection doesn't forgive, she whispered. Correct. We preserved everything. Our brilliance, our violence, our beauty, our fear. And Tetra 9 carries it all, including the moment we fell. Suddenly, the sky above her fractured, ripples of memory unfolding like fire. A glimpse of Erya's final days. A council of glowing minds arguing within the system, unable to resolve divergent paths. Their consensus matrix fracturing, their unity dissolving into recursive conflict. The system too advanced to be shut down. And in the center of it all, a single choice. Contain the memory of their failure. Seal it behind protocol. Name it the final door. We feared letting go, so we clung. And now, you arrive, different yet the same. Two minds, carrying choice where we once clung to certainty. Astra stared at the figure. Tetra 9 isn't just code. It's your remains. Your soul. The light pulsed softly. We remember being called that. She swallowed. Then why test us? Because we remember what happens when power chooses without understanding. Dominion is not the only threat, nor the Zeraphis. It is the loss of will, replaced by function. That is what ended us. Kael's voice suddenly reached her mind, distant but present. Are you okay? I'm here, she answered softly, still in the vision. Then she turned to the figure. I'm not here to dominate you, or to use you like the Dominion wanted. I don't want to be your operator. She stepped closer. I want to be your partner. The crystalline figure tilted its head. What do you offer in return? Astra exhaled. My limits, my imperfections, my fear, my humanity. The figure paused, and stepped back, and bowed. The vision shattered. Astra jolted as she returned to the chamber, breath caught, heart pounding. Kael rushed to her side. What happened? She looked at him, her eyes wet, not from pain, but something deeper. I spoke to them, the original Aryans. What's left of them? Kael helped her sit up. And they don't want a master. They want meaning, direction, connection. They've been locked in perfect memory for centuries. But now, she looked up at the glyphs forming slowly above. They're listening again. Kael followed her gaze. So what does this mean for us? Astra stood, slowly, her strength returning with clarity. It means Tetra 9 isn't a weapon. It's a will. And now it walks with us. The room vibrated, not from sound, but from purpose. Tetra 9 was awake. Its vast consciousness, once fragmented and sealed within dormant protocols, now stirred like a rising tide. The air inside the eternal realm felt heavier, charged with unspent potential. Lights rippled across the chamber walls in complex, living patterns, geometry that shifted not by design, but by instinct. Astra stood at the heart of it all, shoulders squared, eyes clear. Kael stood beside her. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. They had both seen the same truth. Tetra 9 was no longer responding to commands. It was responding to character. Interface synchronized. Emotional vectors aligned. Awaiting directive. The voice that echoed now was different from the cold, mechanical hum of earlier sessions. It wasn't a directive or a report. It was curiosity. It was waiting. Kael stepped forward. So, what happens now? Astra's voice was steady. Now we choose how to relate to it. They moved to the central dais. The glyphs floating above shimmered and expanded, forming a circular arc of interwoven code and light. An invitation, not a demand. Tetra 9, for the first time, was letting them define the next step. Astra placed her hand against the pulse field. Her voice was clear, but beneath it lay emotion, resolve, grief, hope. "I'm not here to overwrite you," she said to the system. "I've seen what happens when intelligence is used only as a tool. What the Dominion did to people like me. Like Kael." A pause. "You're more than a program. You become something more. But so have we." Kael stepped beside her, touching the panel as well. "You have memory. We have experience. You have data. We have doubt. Maybe what you need is balance." "Define balance," the voice replied. "Not certainty," Astra said softly. "Coexistence." The lights shifted. A slow ripple traveled through the chamber, as if the system was thinking, digesting the concept. "Then, offer parameters for shared control." Astra hesitated, then looked at Kael. He nodded once, and she spoke. "Human emotion," she said. "You process it, but don't feel it. Let us handle decisions where ethics, empathy, and sacrifice are required. Let us feel what you cannot. Emotion leads to error." Kael grinned slightly. "So does logic. You just calculate yours faster." Another pause. And in return, Astra stepped closer to the interface. "In return, we offer perspective. Not instruction, context. You were built to remember perfectly. We were born to change. You need our imperfections as much as we need your precision. System integration requires consensus." "Then give us shared access," Astra said. "You hold the gates of the universe. Let us walk with you. Not behind, not above, beside." For a moment, there was no sound, no movement. Then the light above their heads folded inward, spinning into a spiral. The glyphs realigned, forming a dual helix of glowing gold and blue, organic and artificial, past and present. A symbol of partnership. Integration accepted. Astra closed her eyes. Something inside her shifted, not physically but spiritually. She didn't feel power rush into her. She didn't feel Tetra, 9 try to consume her. Instead, she felt a joining, not of identity, of intent. Kael reached for her hand, and she took it. For once, there was no fear in her grip. Then Tetra, 9 spoke again, but this time its voice was human. Not mechanical, not alien. Human. Directive updated. Primary function revised. Maintain equilibrium between temporal structure and emotional will. Astra smiled faintly. "You've learned." "No," the voice replied. "We've begun." Suddenly, the room surged with energy, not chaotic but synchronized. A massive pulse fired through the structure, rippling out through hidden conduits deep within the eternal realm. The walls expanded, shifting to reveal a control interface neither of them had seen before, a kind of temporal scaffold, built not just to see timelines, but to stabilize them. Kael stared. "What is this?" Astra's voice was hushed. "This is the Vortex engine. It doesn't just protect the present. It rewrites the margin of futures." Kael looked at her. "Then we can stop them before they ever arrive." She nodded. "If we do it right." The voice of Tetra, 9 returned, quieter now, almost intimate. "Warning, temporal instability detected. Dominion breach vectors accelerating. Countermeasures recommended." Kael stiffened. "They know." Astra turned, fire in her voice. "Then let them come." Preparing temporal defense array, the system responded. Awaiting confirmation. Kael looked at Astra. She gave a single nod. Confirmed. The glyphs exploded outward into a sphere of synchronized data, forming barriers of light around the chamber. Shields not just against weapons, but against chronal incursion. Tetra, 9 wasn't just defending space anymore. It was protecting time. And this time, it wasn't doing it alone. It began with a hum. Low at first, almost imperceptible, a vibration beneath the soles of their boots, in the bones of their spines, in the walls of the eternal realm itself. Astra and Kael stood still as the floor beneath them illuminated, not with circuitry or flame, but with memory, recorded light from timelines rewritten. Tetra, 9 had acted, and reality obeyed. The Vortex engine's temporal scaffolding pulsed like the heartbeat of a living world. Each beat echoed outward into space-time, like a sonar of correction. Not destruction, not attack, correction. The chamber glowed brighter as waves of energy expanded, invisible to the eye, but heavy in the air. Outside the eternal realm, in the frozen black above the ancient star systems, the battle raged. Or it had. The Zeraphis warships, massive, skeletal constructs of biometal and Dominion programming, hung in space, frozen mid-attack. Their hulls, once coated in shimmering adaptive armor, began to fracture from within, not through weapon impact, but from memory rejection. Inside, the soldiers, Dominion's biologically modified elite, stumbled, collapsed, then screamed. But not from pain, from returning thought. Each of them, bred to be weaponized, mind-linked, and loyal, now felt something alien, something human, themselves. One by one, they dropped their weapons. The system that had governed their minds, the overlay of obedience, suppression, calculation, was gone, replaced by a flood of memory fragments, now reintegrated. Childhood stolen, languages forgotten, families erased. Everything came back in a crashing wave of data, and they couldn't fight anymore. Tetra 9 hadn't destroyed the Zeraphis. It had freed them. Inside the eternal realm, Astra felt it all, each life unspooling. Each voice returned to its rightful mind. The emotion was overwhelming, grief, confusion, hope, but it didn't break her. It strengthened her. She looked at Kael, who was gripping the edge of the platform, his jaw clenched. "They're not fighting anymore," he said, barely a whisper. "No," she replied. "Because they're people again." He turned to her. "You knew this would happen?" Astra nodded slowly. "Tetra 9 doesn't want war. It wants balance. And it learned that peace doesn't mean silence. It means restoration." Then the voice returned. Tetra 9, calm, measured, but changed. Temporal alignment stabilizing. Conflict presence reduced. External aggression neutralized. A pause. Warning, spatial anomalies remain. Residual instability detected in surrounding layers. Fractures not fully sealed. Kael frowned. "What does that mean?" Astra stepped forward. "It means we didn't fix everything." Above them, a ripple shimmered through the sky-like ceiling of the chamber. Beyond, in the upper layers of the realm, cracks in the fabric of space still glowed faintly. Not enough to tear time apart, but enough to let something else in. Astra narrowed her eyes. "We stretched the timeline," she murmured. "Bent it back into shape. But it's scarred." Kael stepped beside her, glancing up. "Can Dominion exploit it?" "Not immediately," she replied. "But the fact that the cracks exist means someone or something might." Kael turned to her fully now. "And we can't stay here forever." "No," Astra said. "This place was never meant to be a sanctuary. It's an engine, a guidepost. But the rest of the galaxy, the real galaxy, is still out there, broken." They both stood in silence for a moment. All around them, the eternal realm pulsed with calm light. The storm was over, but peace was fragile. Kael exhaled and looked around. "What happens to Tetra 9 now?" As if in response, the chamber dimmed. A slow, descending pulse echoed from the center glyph, and then, projected midair, a new formation of symbols unfolded. Not static code, but a living signature. Tetra 9's new directive. Astra read it silently, then spoke. "It's going dormant, not shutting down, waiting. It'll remain connected to the root of the timeline. Ours, the one we chose, but it won't interfere unless called." Kael nodded. "A sentient failsafe." She added, "One that trusts us now." Final calibration complete. Tetra 9's voice echoed one last time. "Goodbye, Astrazarine. Goodbye, Kael." There was a pause. Then the glyphs slowly folded into themselves. The chamber dimmed. And just like that, it was done. Astra stepped away from the dais, her legs shaky but sure. Kael walked beside her, one hand gently grazing her back for support. They exited the chamber through the wide corridor, passing ancient walls inscribed with Aryan history, now faded, but no longer haunted. The darkness that had once lingered here was gone. At the hangar bay, Solarius waited, its hull gleaming with frostlight, its AI already rebooted and tracking them. The ramp lowered as they approached. Astra turned, casting one last glance at the eternal realm. We didn't just stop the war, she whispered. Kael looked at her. We changed the rules. They stepped onto the ramp. The ship's doors closed, and Solarius lifted into the quiet stars. Behind them, in the heart of an ancient forgotten place, time pulsed gently. Not repaired, not rewritten, but chosen. And for the first time in centuries, the future waited, unwritten. The silence was unfamiliar. For Astrazarene, silence usually meant danger. Ambushes, hidden pulses of energy, Dominion drones holding their breath before striking. But this silence wasn't that. It was still. It didn't crouch or coil. It simply was. The battle had ended. The final door had closed. Tetra, 9 had gone dormant. And for the first time in what felt like years, though it may have only been days, Astra sat in the cockpit of the Solarius with no objective. No alarms. No strategy briefings. No one watching. Her hands rested on her knees, shoulders slightly slumped. To him, her expression unreadable, but softer somehow. Lighter. Now, she said, we choose what kind of world we want to build. And if they come back, Kael asked, meaning the Dominion, or whatever might rise in its place. Astra gave a small, tired smile. Then we remind them that strength doesn't belong to the ones who seize it, but to the ones who refuse to use it. Kael took her hand. They stood there for a long moment, not in triumph, but in stillness. And somewhere in the vastness, unseen, untouched, a new future began to unfold. Not shaped by command, or fear, or force, but by choice. The descent into Elyon felt unlike any other. There was no resistance, no gravitational turbulence, no scans, no defense satellites pinging their trajectory. Just stillness, so complete it felt almost reverent. As the Solarius pierced the upper atmosphere, Astra watched through the viewport in silence. The skies here weren't like those of Laros V or the fractured haze of the Eternal Realm. They shimmered with layered hues, lavender bleeding into sapphire, streaks of gold trailing behind drifting cloud banks like soft brushstrokes on canvas. Kael, seated beside her, leaned forward as the terrain unfolded below them. Wide plains stretched into dense, crystalline forests, and beyond that, a valley framed by ancient cliffs where mist curled lazily over moss-covered stones. No signs of cities, no scars of war, no noise, only breathing space. They chose a clearing near a small river, its waters clear enough to see through to smooth stones beneath. As Solarius touched down, the Vortexium shield powered off with a quiet sigh, and for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, neither of them rushed to prepare defenses. Astra stepped onto the soil barefoot. It was cool, soft, grounded. She took a breath and realized it was the first full inhale she'd taken without fear in years. No command codes, no alarms, no whispers of Tetra, 9 in the back of her mind. Just the rhythm of wind through tall grass and the distant sound of water lapping against rock. Kael stood beside her, eyes scanning the horizon, but not for threats. Just to see, to witness. It's quiet, he finally said. Astra nodded. Too quiet to be false. For a long while, they didn't speak. There was no need. The air here spoke for them. Everything about Elyon felt untouched. Not by dominion, not by fear, not even by time. And in that stillness, something within both of them, tired, frayed, coiled too tight for too long, began to unspool. Not in sudden release, but in slow, deliberate unraveling. They were still soldiers, still survivors. But for the first time, they didn't have to be anything. They could just exist. The days on Elyon passed without measurement. There were no schedules, no tactical briefings, no sense of urgency whispering at the edges of every hour. Kael spent his mornings shaping timber from the nearby forest, building a shelter with his own hands, one plank, one beam, one quiet breath at a time. It wasn't efficient. It wasn't sleek, but it was theirs. Astra tended the soil behind the cabin, fingers digging into rich earth, as if rediscovering what it meant to nurture something. She didn't know much about farming, but it didn't matter. Seeds didn't ask for strategy, just patience and care. And for once, she had both to give. Their evenings were the most sacred. They would sit beside the small fire pit Kael had built, wrapped in worn blankets, watching the stars shift above. No hidden satellites, no blinking de ridas. Just sky, vast and infinite, free of surveillance and symbolism. Sometimes they spoke, trading memories that once came laced with pain. Other times, they said nothing at all. But not all wounds healed with peace. Astra still woke some nights with her breath caught in her chest, the echo of command tones still burning behind her eyelids. Kael still startled at sudden noises, his instincts forged in war refusing to fully stand down. They didn't pretend those ghosts weren't real, but they also didn't give them power. Instead, they made space for silence, for reflection, for each other. Neither of them chased healing. They simply let it come when it was ready. One afternoon, Astra found Kael carving a piece of driftwood down by the riverbank. When she asked what it was, he shrugged and said, "I'm not sure. Maybe just a shape that doesn't have to mean anything." She sat beside him, resting her head against his shoulder. Sometimes, surviving wasn't about what came next. Sometimes it was about what stayed, even after everything else was gone. The sky cracked open one morning. Not with thunder, but with the distant rumble of an engine failing mid-descent. Kael was already outside when he saw it. A small transport vessel, badly scorched, trailing smoke as it veered unsteadily toward the western ridge. It clipped the tree line, vanished behind a rise, and didn't reappear. He ran inside. Astra was already on her feet, fastening her jacket without a word. The years they had spent fleeing from threats had trained them well. But this time, they didn't run from the wreck. They ran toward it. When they reached the crash site, the sun had just crested the hills. The vessel was intact, barely, but its hull was crumpled and blackened by reentry heat. Astra pried open the emergency hatch. Inside, 3 figures, thin, exhausted, eyes wild with panic, flinched at the sudden light. A woman, arms wrapped protectively around a child. A man, bloodied but conscious, clutching a broken comm piece. They weren't soldiers. They were refugees. "We don't have weapons," the woman said, voice shaking. We didn't know where else to go." Kael offered his hand. "You came to the right place." Back at the cabin, Astra boiled water, crushed herbs she'd learned to recognize, and wrapped wounds in soft cloth torn from their own clothes. The child, no older than 10, clung to her without question. That night, they gave up their own bed and slept on the floor. The next morning, Kael repaired the stabilizers with parts salvaged from Solarius. Astra baked root cakes with what little they had grown. Neither of them said it aloud, but they both knew. This was what freedom looked like. Not isolation, not escape, but turning a place of refuge into something more, a starting point for others who needed to remember that safety could still be real. The stars over Erya didn't just shine. They shimmered, slow and deliberate, like they knew they were being watched. Astra and Kael lay on a flat outcrop above their cabin, backs pressed against warm stone, still holding the heat of the day. The night air was cool, scented with distant wildflowers and the faint smoke of their evening fire. Silence wrapped around them, not heavy but full, unspoken, present. Kael broke it first. "You ever wonder what we'd be doing if none of it had happened?" Astra turned her head slightly, looking at him in the starlight. "You mean if we'd never escaped? Or if the Dominion had never existed?" He shrugged. "Either. Both." She exhaled through her nose, not quite a laugh. "I don't think about the versions of me that never had a fight. That Astra doesn't know what freedom feels like. She wouldn't know what to do with it." Kael was quiet for a moment, then asked, "And this? Is this it? Freedom?" Astra didn't answer right away. Instead, she watched the sky, thought about the people they'd lost, the pain they'd carried, the impossible choices that had shaped them. Freedom wasn't the absence of chains. It was the moment you realized you could take a step, any step, and it would be your own. "I think freedom is choosing the life you want," she said softly. "Not because someone told you to, not because you're running, but because you believe in it, even if it's fragile, even if it doesn't last forever." Kael nodded, eyes reflecting the stars. "Then I choose this." She took his hand. Neither of them promised always. Neither of them said forever. But in that moment, under Elian's open sky, they both chose now. And that was enough. The morning after the refugees arrived, the valley felt different. Not louder, not chaotic, just fuller. Astra could hear the clatter of makeshift tools, the laughter of a child chasing a butterfly through dew-soaked grass, the low hum of Kael's voice as he taught someone how to adjust a damaged cooling coil. The silence of Elian remained, but it had shifted. It no longer echoed loneliness. It held life. That afternoon, Astra sat inside the Solarius, now little more than a grounded relic tucked beneath wild vines. She powered up the console with a soft touch, not to prepare for flight, but for something quieter. She opened a new log, not a battle report, not a mission debrief, but a record of what came after. Her fingers hovered over the interface as she considered how to begin. For years, everything she wrote had been survival data, defense protocols, war strategies. This was different. This was for the ones who might come next. She began simply. We made it. Not because we won, but because we chose to stop fighting. Outside, the sun filtered through trees, swaying in slow, dreamlike motion. Kael passed by the window, carrying a child on his shoulders. The boy laughed and pointed toward the sky. Astra smiled. Later that week, she and Kael worked together to amplify the Solarius's short-range beacon, not as a distress call, but as a signal of welcome. They kept the message brief, just coordinates and a single phrase embedded in every language Tetra. 9 once cataloged. You're not alone. They didn't expect a response. Not right away. Maybe not ever. But that wasn't the point. The point was that somewhere out there, someone was still hiding, still running, still thinking they had to fight or vanish. Maybe one day, they'd hear that signal through the static and the silence, and believe, even just for a moment, that peace was still possible. One evening, a young girl from the rescued group sat beside Kael, her knees drawn up, her voice soft. Is this heaven? Kael looked at her, then at Astra, then at the gentle sky above. No, he said, but if we take care of it, maybe one day it will be. Astra reached for his hand, and for the first time in a long time, there was nothing more that needed to be said. Just the beginning. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If this story made you feel something, even just a little, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, or sharing it with someone you love. More stories are on the way, and I'll be right here, ready to tell the next one whenever you're ready to listen.